Hello, everyone. Welcome to this great panel today. My name is Chelsea Behringer, and I'm going to be facilitating for everyone today. So I'm going to be introducing first a group of presenters from the University of Alberta. So we have Jill Bueddefeld, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alberta. Elizabeth Halpenny, professor, faculty of kinesiology, sport and recreation at the University of Alberta, and CJ Blye, PhD candidate at the faculty of kinesiology, sport and recreation, also at the University of Alberta. Take it away, ladies.
Okay, thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm just going to share our slide deck, and we've shared this with Chelsea, and she's going to make sure that this is available afterwards to everyone here and the participants within the group. So I'm just going to adjust a few things here and hit present. Here we go. Okay, so you should all be able to see my screen now at this stage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of give us a little bit of a brief overview of what we're going to do today. So again, we're a group from the University of Alberta, and we're working on this project as part of Dr. Halpenny's SSHRC study on some knowledge translation work. But we're all presenting a couple of separate ideas and examples of what we've done in our own different types of unique communications. So just a little brief acknowledgement here that we are from the University of Alberta, and this is supported by SSHRC, as I mentioned. And here we do have a land acknowledgement. I find these hard when you're doing online conferences. We wrote this here, but although we're all from the University of Alberta group, I am currently in Winnipeg, so I'll just adjust the language appropriately. So we'd like to acknowledge that some of us are located, CJ and Liz, are on Treaty 6 territory. I myself am on Treaty 1. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. We acknowledge these things as a reminder that we are all treaty people bound to one another by the spirit and intent of treaty. So just wanted to start that way. The format for today, we are going to have a 15-minute presentation where we're each going to share an example. So I'm going to present an example about my experience using videos in research and how that went down a Reddit rabbit hole that wound up being a really productive part of the research this summer. CJ is going to present her experience with radio interviews and sharing more publicly using an oral format. And Liz is going to present her article in The Conversation Canada and introduce what that platform is and why it's such a valuable and powerful tool for knowledge mobilization. And that's going to build in really nicely to Cheryl's talk on sort of plain language and how to communicate with the public. So without further ado, we'll dive right in, just being mindful here that we want to make sure we stay on time. So my experience with videos really began, and again, there's a link here that you'll be able to click in the slides if you want to watch the actual video. But as part of my dissertation research, I made a short video that shared the findings of my study with participants and also with the public. So it's a short 6-minute video that I had co-produced with some of my research partners. And it has been by and far the best thing I've done in terms of knowledge mobilization. It really helped create some easy talking points around my study and helped me share my research with a much broader audience. So this visual format I found to be really effective, far more so than the publications or book chapters that I'm most proud of. It's been a really great tool for knowledge mobilization and sharing. I'm not going to play that. We're just going to keep going. As you can see, despite all the publications and things that I have, even if those get, however many reads and whatnot, even this video just being out a year has already had a couple hundred different views. And it's really been a catalyst for both helping people understand my work. When they meet me, I often get introduced by people via email with a link to this video included. So it's often used to sort of showcase my research and is a really easy place for people to understand a little bit of my personality and abilities as a speaker as well, to share my findings. I found in the process of making this video as well, it was really key in helping me create what we would call an elevator pitch. So I created talking points and made sure that I hit my the main findings that I wanted to share from the research, but I did it in such a way that used plain language and was really meant to be accessible to a broad audience across different disciplines and including the public. Like I've mentioned, this video has been integral for using it at conferences, at different presentations, and it often gets sent around to people via social media or in email introductions about my work. I would also say it's been a big part of a catalyst for sort of furthering that knowledge mobilization. So it was sent to a person doing an article with the Winnipeg Free Press. She watched the video, thought I'd be a good person to interview, and that sort of spiraled off into an interview with the Free Press, which was then a print, interview, talking and sharing my knowledge about the topic even further. So I think that the videos and having platforms that maybe don't even start in a text or a written format, they do invite further opportunities to share your research to different people. And I think it really does help communicate that you are at least thinking about ways to be a more effective knowledge mobilizer and communicator across different disciplines and with different people. So that was one example of how that's really kind of spiraled and has been effective in sharing my research. This summer, though, we made a research video with a park that I was working with, since because of COVID, all face-to-face interpretation was canceled, and we had to come up with some other creative ideas. So we made this research video with the Elk Island Park staff, where they planned their interpretation using a video as opposed to sort of an in-person interpretation format. So the difference here is the first video I gave the example of was to disseminate or share my findings. This video here is actually part of the research, so communicating effective environmental education. But the really interesting thing that happened was we were handing out postcards to share this research video. And what it did was someone found one of the postcards and then shared the link, even though it was embedded as a hidden link on YouTube, they shared it on Reddit. And so over the weekend, we saw it go sort of mini viral, where over 48 hours, it had 350 views in a very short period of time. This thread was commented on and it was really shared. And I had a moment where I was like, oh, Liz, I'm not sure, do we need to control the message on Reddit? I'm not sure where this is going to go. And instead, I made a Jill the Researcher account on Reddit and said, here's the information for the study if you want to participate. I think it's a really good thing that we're sharing this information online. But this was done by someone else. Someone else shared this on Reddit. And I think we just had to be flexible and adaptive and say, okay, we're going to disseminate and have our research go this way. It's clearly an effective tool and people are watching it and interested. And so I think that it really just shows the powerful use of videos, and especially pairing that with platforms like Reddit or even some social media channels for sharing can be a really sort of powerful 1-2 punch in terms of knowledge mobilization. So those are my examples of how I've used videos to both disseminate and also engage people in my research directly. Based on these two things, I think I'd have a hard time going back to only written platforms at this stage. And they've been really effective for, furthering engagement beyond just video platforms. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to CJ now, and she's going to introduce her experience with radio interviews and different forms of oral communications. So CJ, I can keep the PowerPoint going and you can just tell me when you're ready to advance or if you want to show anything else, if that sounds okay with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. This slide's good. So my experience, similar to Jill, that, we have some tools at our disposal outside of just the traditional publishing in academic journals to reach a much wider audience. So my research is really focused on pro-environmental behaviors and influencing park visitors to engage in particular behaviors that allow for less impact on the natural environment. And I recently published a study in the Journal of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism and was really fortunate to have fantastic communication support within my university at the University of Alberta. And was actually suggested by our communications director that I try to expand some of my research communication within the university and beyond, and looking at ways to publish my findings in a more accessible and sort of different types of communication, which led me to engaging with the CBC. And I have now conducted 3 radio interviews on some of my research specifically, and then some of my sort of expertise in the field. And some of the advice that I received as it relates to radio interviews is that we really need to make sure as researchers and as communicators that we're practicing what we want to say, and we are looking at our 3 key messages that we want to get across. So we don't have unlimited time. And even in our journals, when we have sort of a limited amount of space, it is a lot different than that. We have, between 3 to 6 minutes, give or take, the interview and the program that you're working with. So you really want to prepare. What are your 3 top messages? And then what are your answers for the questions that you cannot answer? So there's lots of limitations out there in our research, and there's lots of really exciting questions that we wish we had asked or we wish we could answer. So it's important to practice how you would answer a researcher's question when you don't have the answer. So we want to be giving those 3 main points, but we also want to make sure that we're not overstepping and suggesting things that we maybe don't have the answer to at that moment. So those are 2 really important things to practice when you're preparing for a radio interview. And then the other pieces of advice that I would have are looking at what are the stations and the networks and the podcasts that you think are really connected to your research. Reach out to those organizations. They are always looking for content. So an organization like CBC, for example, their radio morning and afternoon shows, they are looking for new content every single day. And so by us reaching out to them and pitching our story to them, we've got a really high likelihood of getting our message out to the public. So it was a really exciting experience. And now I have some great connections with the CBC. And like I said, I'm hoping to expand that and looking into podcasts and other types of oral communication.
Great, thank you, CJ. All right, Liz, Dr. Halpenny, would you mind telling us about your experience with the Conversation Canada and maybe just provide a little bit of context in case some people aren't familiar with what that is?
Sure. So I just wanted to reflect, as we're all busy researchers, often we have a challenge of trying to get our information out there quickly. And it's actually, working with our university media representatives, like CJ just described, is one tool, and it's usually a very rewarding way to reach out and connect with either national or local media. I also do try, and so does Jill and CJ, to use social media as outlets to sort of start saying, hey, we've got another paper out, great. But personally, I find that exhausting. I can't keep up with it. And so my new favorite tool is to work with the Conversation, which is this online collective. Let me start with a tagline here, which is academic rigor and journalistic flair, which I love, which they genuinely helped my colleague, Glenn Venegard, and I publish some of our research in a more digestible way. So this is one of the articles we published with them is this backgrounder on how we should not be feeding or encouraging visitors not to engage with wildlife in multiple ways, feeding them, stopping their vehicles in parks, that sort of thing. So it's an environmental education piece based on research that we had been conducting. So why the Conversation? It's free. It's read by many different outlets. So they disseminate our content in more than 22,000 sites worldwide. So we're getting international exposure. They basically source all the information from university scholars and researchers, and then can help you convert it. So they did help us tweak our story to make it a little bit more appealing and get us out of our dry academic verbiage that we always tend to lean heavily on. And then as authors, we also had to sort of sign up to these, editorial charters or codes of conduct when we entered into the process. This has been started up by scholars first in Australia, but we do have at least 2 offices here in Canada now where you can reach out to the Conversation and ask to, pitch a story idea to them, and then they will help you along the way to try and get that exposure to popular media. From this particular story that we ran with Conversation Canada, we got lift or connections with CBC International, Global News, local news outlets, obviously, and our own community and our own university press picked up on the story, which we hadn't pitched to them earlier. So that was great coverage. I think it was local and national, and even a little international. But importantly, and this is one of the biggest audiences for us to reach out to, the members of the public are passionate about what happens in their national parks and their wildlife, and that's important to connect with. But it's also, we tweak the interest and attention of policymakers and trying to leverage more science-based informed decision-making around what we're doing in terms of managing visitors as well as wildlife in our parks. So it was a win-win-win all around for us. And I would say this is one of the best tools that have come up in a few years for us to communicate. I'm done.
You're on mute, Jill.
Thank you. I was just saying before we got started, I did a computer update, and now it's a little harder on Zoom to see when you're muted. So forgive me there. So the Conversation Canada, this is what it looks like. You can see there's sort of a nice tagline. They use really crisp images, and it gives a little bio too. So it includes different links to other research. And if you haven't yet, just give it a quick Google, but we'll include the links in our slide deck as well. What we've now done is we've set up a couple of discussion questions, and we want to just give a little bit of time for discussing some tools and just hearing from our audience here about what you think might work. So we have a couple of things to prompt discussion, but we're also happy to just discuss how you want. We've left about 10 minutes for that, and then Chelsea is going to hand it back over to Cheryl, who's going to give the next presentation. I just had a little circle here and highlighted. The nice thing too about the conversation is it's really shareable. So you can share it on all your social medias. And like Liz said, that can be really taxing otherwise if you have to create your own content, but these links are embedded. So you can really quickly and easily share your work this way. So it's really kind of nice that way, and that it makes it easy. Okay, so if we could bring it up, we had originally proposed discussion groups, but because we only have 10 minutes, we thought we'd like to just have this kind of as a main group discussion. So we're just thinking about, when you're thinking about your audience, do you think about who your audience is and who you want to communicate? Are there unique communication strategies that you can use from what we've presented? And maybe, are there ways that you can think about it and make it visual or oral, using something other than written language? And maybe what are some barriers? So these are just sort of prompts to get some discussion going, but I'd like to just open it up, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now at this point, just so we can see more people here and view the chat as well. So CJ or Liz, do you want to help field some questions here? I'm just opening.
So if you would like to turn your video on back now, everybody, you can go to the top of the screen and you can click exit on hidden view or self view. That way everyone can see you. And if you want, you can type additional questions in the chat. You could raise your hand in the video, or under participant icons, you could click yes. And that way I would know that you're there and I can add you to the queue for responses. So there's a question from Annalise. They thank you for the great presentation, and they're wondering, how do you find your target audiences to ask questions about what messages they need and in what format?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can do something called an audience analysis, but I think it also depends on what the purpose of your research is. So if the purpose of your research, like in Dr. Halpenny's example, has a really public or a policy connection, then you're thinking about, how do you reach the public? How are you communicating that effectively to the public? If your research is about a certain group of people, how can you access, if it's trail users or runners, how can you access that specific group of people? So I think part of that is doing an audience analysis and thinking through some of the purpose of what's the why of what you do your research. CJ or Liz, anything to add to that?
The only other tip I would say, and I know a number of you might be affiliated with organizations that do training in this area anyhow, but I know one of my graduate students attended a specific program at the University of Guelph starting last January on this specific topic. So they have three courses in this on knowledge mobilization and knowledge translation. And the one that started in January last year was specific to audience identification. So there are programs out there that help you with that too. It is one of the toughest things to do.
Veronique was wondering which software did you use for the video, and did you have some help to do it?
Yes, so a few things with the videos. The one, I actually convinced our research partners to help produce it. So there's a local company who they make some commercials for the different operators, the tourism operators, and the zoo that I worked with. And in that case, they were willing to sort of do it almost pro bono, or just sort of at cost for me. And then that was subsidized by both the research partners involved. For the other videos that I've made, I made a template actually for the Parks Canada one in a program called Bueddefeld. CJ, could you just drop the link in there while I'm describing that? And CJ's used it extensively when she was teaching this last semester during COVID. It helps you make short videos. So they have like an explainer template, or different types of templates where you can just sort of pop in your content, or your audio or your visuals, and it really kind of does a bit of the work for you. So there's a couple of free versions. In this case, I purchased a full version so we can make more comprehensive videos, but they also have stock footage. So the first video we made with Parks Canada used a lot of like bison stock footage and bear stock footage. But then the Parks Canada team, actually, they happened to know someone who wanted to make a short video. So they took my example and ran with it and produced their own version. So I was really impressed that they put in all that effort. But yeah, there's another great example in the chat there. There's lots of free programs right now that make that really easy to do. So the one that I had originally made maybe took me 2 hours to make. So in terms of output, that wasn't a whole lot of time investment. It was pretty easy. CJ, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, in terms of the video content, Jill and I are also working on another project. We just submitted a grant, and we talked about looking at students that need and want the experience. The sort of the next generation is amazing with technology, as most of us know, and if you have kids or friends or teenagers in your lives, you know that they are remarkably better than some of us. But looking at those colleges and universities that have programs, a lot of students need to complete assignments in order to get their degrees, and they are really keen on making these videos, and they can be really effective tools. If anyone is sort of aware of the Whistler area, a really great example there is Aware Whistler. Same idea, environmental communication messaging. And again, they used a local student to help produce that video. So for those of you that are looking to make videos but don't think you have the skill set within your own office or your own department, it's a really great idea to reach out to local colleges and universities and look for students that are interested in making really high quality production films.
If you have any additional questions, please put them into the chat. While we're waiting, I was just wondering, based on the attendees and everybody listening to this great presentation, based on the communication examples that were mentioned today, are there any that really stood out to you that you'd like to try in your own work? Stephanie said, we work a lot with media. I'm definitely checking with my team if the conversation is on our radar. Thank you.
From a pedagogy standpoint, for a person who's teaching students all the time, similar to what CJ and Jill were just discussing, I've assigned my students this term to actually create either a biteable video or something similar to that, or an infographic that is designed to educate tourists on how to be more responsible. So again, it's that same generation. They're really interested in this video-based and sound-based forms of communication. They're using their digital native skills. It's just an exciting way for them to translate the ideas and theories about how do we communicate environmental education and then put it into practice in the classroom.
So I think we're going to do one more question before we switch into Cheryl's presentation, and it is from Annalise again. What do you find CBC looks for when they ask for research experts? Is it mostly topic areas of interest or something else?
Yeah, in my experience, it has been a specific topic areas. But again, I think if you are reaching out to them and suggesting that you have really exciting and relevant research, and you can sort of showcase how and why you are the correct person to be talking about that content, they're really interested in looking for those experts in a particular field and on a topic, for sure.
All right. Thank you all for your presentation. So we're going to be shifting gears now to Cheryl Stephens' presentation. If you could please click the 3 blue dots above your name to hide your video at this time, that would be great. And take it away, Cheryl.
Thanks. I'll just introduce myself because I'm not an academic. I started as a lawyer and moved into legal communications as a consultant, and quickly got introduced to plain language and the law. So I've been working on plain language for 30 years, and it can get a bit stale. So a few years ago, I started looking at the research reports on neuroscience to figure out how much it could tell me about how to better reach the readers. So I'm going to share my screen now, I hope. Sorry, it's going to take me a minute. Okay, I'll try something else. Sorry, I hate doing this to people. I still don't see it.
I can put it up on my screen.
Okay.
Let's try that.
Okay. So I looked at the reading process as it's been found to operate by brain researchers and cognitive research science researchers. And I know that you work very hard to produce your material, but you want to also work at making it fluent for the reader. And one of the key things is that while the writer may imply something, the reader has to infer. And that's where a lot of our communications fail, because the reader doesn't have the background or the skills to infer. Next. So this is the definition of plain language from the International Plain Language Federation, a federation of 3 organizations internationally. And it's based on what the result is of having the reader read your material. Can they find what they need? Can they understand it? And then can they make use of that information to satisfy whatever task they have at hand? The research I've looked at all supports the guidelines. You may have seen 10 tips or whatever for plain language, and I gathered a bunch of those and had found there were 14 different tips, and they're all supported by the research. Next. Okay, so these are the tools that have been used. Initially when, as long as 50 years ago, these tools started coming into use. And while originally people were looking at disease or injury or how to treat it, now, especially since the development of artificial intelligence, scientists are looking at this to see how does the brain work so that the artificial intelligence can be made to mimic it. So this is just an example of how we watch things go, language move through the brain and be processed. Next. So the key thing is that there are 3 parts. The person has to be able to process the language and then understand the content, put it all together to make something useful that they can save in their memory, learn from and save in their memory banks, and then to be able to retrieve it or recall it easily to make use of the information. And in the processes here, the brain constantly looks for shortcuts, ways to optimize the activity and ensure that they understand it, but with the least effort possible. Next. So when scientists are measuring, they're looking at measurable things, speed, efficiency, and recall. They can measure that and they can observe it in the brain. And so that tells us a lot about how people process. For the reader, it's a different measure. they're looking for how easy the material is to read compared to how much information they gain. So if it's very easy and they gain nothing, they're not satisfied. If it's a bit of effort, but they gain a lot of information, then they're happy, and they make emotional judgments and decide that they like the writer or the topic, etc. So next. So fluency is that type of reading and thinking, as you know, that engages only the fast, superficial type 1 thinking. So that's what readers want from you. They want you to give them information without making them analyze it themselves. And the keys to cortical efficiency we can move on to that next one. Cortical efficiency is, how do you get the reader's attention? How do you help them understand? And how do you help them attach the new information to existing information for better quality storage of the information for future use? And that list of words tells you things that are important in the process. And then in information gain, while we would say simple sentences and short words are preferred, if a word that's slightly longer carries more specific information, then you can choose that word over the shorter, simpler word, because it will give more information for less effort. And I'll show you what the effort involved in processing a word. But an example of choosing a simpler word is that meat eating is simpler than carnivorous. And now, again, it depends on your audience, which one they're going to find they're most comfortable with. Moving on. Okay, words. Next. I use these corpora to decide whether a word is frequent or in common use. And I just bring them to your attention because when familiarity and common use is the desired activity, this is the way to see if it's familiar. Next. So we have context in the sentence that helps us recognize a word. We have to get the reader's attention, then they have to recognize the word, and they have to process it and check it with their memory, the vocabulary storage and their memories of events and experiences so that they can assign the proper meaning. And often a lot of energy is wasted by getting the wrong interpretation and having to go back and do it again. It's like autocorrect or predictive text. The reader's always looking ahead, always predicting what's coming, and then has to back up to correct itself. So the less they back up to correct their understanding, the better. Okay, so semantics is when you get the word and the sentence working together, and the person uses that to confirm their accurate understanding. Next. For example, these words all sound the same, and when we read, we're actually sounding it out in our brain. We sound it out first, syllable by syllable or sound by sound, and then we recognize the whole word and say, I might know that word, and check it against our storage banks. So that's called word disambiguation in the modern era. Next. And so in sentences, what are we looking for? Next. So we want the sentence structure tells people something about the word. They expect a subject to be in the forward position and a verb to follow. So you don't want to put anything in between those, but you recognize that using words, subject, verb, object order helps people decide both what the word means and to understand the sentence. And again, it's in context. Next. So I call it structural priming, but this is the standard layout for an English sentence. It's the default. And this is what people expect from a lifelong reading and listening activity. They expect the subject, verb, object order. And anything that comes in between causes delay in processing or confusion. It's true you don't have to limit yourself to this, but you want to start a sentence with this format and then carry on from there. Next. So you could see here that sentences are have different word orders normally in different languages. And so when I say something about English, I'm not talking about other languages. There's been a book written about the reader's brain talking about how it operates in the Danish language. So it's not much help to us. It's some help, but not satisfactory for English. Next. Inferences. So when I mentioned at the beginning that the writer implies things, and grammarians argue over this, the writer implies and the reader infers. And what you wanted, and inferences are an important stage of reading, and I'll show you why. Next. So people, as I said, they're constantly looking forward, they're processing ahead, guessing ahead. It's a projection, it's an educated guess where the story's going, and anticipating chronological developments. People who are inferring are drawing the dots together, and not everyone has the skill to do that. Next. These are the international reading levels as things are measured in all the Commonwealth and other European countries to see what people's reading skill is. There's a level 0 where a person can't read at all. Level 1, they're comfortable with words. They can follow simple directions, but they can't deconstruct a sentence. And level 2, people are more comfortable. They can work with sentences. They can make low-level inferences within a document itself. 49% of the Canadian population falls under level 3. Level 3 is considered the minimum for a knowledge-oriented society. And that's our middle area, but still it's only low-level inferences that people can make. And then the better their skill at making inferences, they have higher reading skills. So to reach 49% of the population, you really need to be clear. And for level 3, it needs to be simple, clear, well laid out and designed. Next. So implied is take 2 pills 4 times a day, and the person has to figure out what time would that be? How do I do that? Overt, open, expressed language is spelling it out like this. So this is what you need to do to better reach that 49% of the population. Spell it out, put it out. And this is why plain language is not always briefer, because you have to make it clearer. Next. So again, this is just to remind you, we're gonna look in assessing reading at these features. Next. So for speed, you want to use familiar, common, and ordinary words. And when you do that, people can skip some of the steps because the word is so well known to them already. Efficiency has to do with how much of the glucose that's in your decision-making part of the brain is going to be available and used. So avoid backtracking, make the relationships clear, spell out the cause and effect, and follow an anticipated order of events. Such as if you're going to say your result, start with what you did. You know, we put this in there and then we saw this develop. That's the expected order of events, how I would see it if it was playing out in front of me. And then for accuracy of recall, you can assist people by providing priming, showing the primacy and hierarchy, and connecting new to old. And always the most recent information is what people are going to remember longest. So if you want them to act on it, you have to repeat it at the end. And so my neurons fire together. It's because every time you pull up a memory of a word or an experience or something, you're changing it by incorporating the current information in it. And that actually makes the memory stronger, but changes it somewhat. So next.
2-minute time reminder.
Okay. And let's go to the next one then. So this is it for speed and efficiency. And this is available in my materials that I've turned out. In the document I provided, there's a set of writing guidelines that are developed from this material. So next. Write for outcomes, which is speed, efficiency, and recall, and understand how complicated the reading process is, that there are many stages to it, even though within 1/100th of a millisecond, most words can be defined accurately. So you assist fluency by being as simple as possible and requiring the least effort from the reader, and you'll get better results, more enthusiasm and engagement. And making recall easier is an important thought, because as soon as we take in the sensory information, our neurons are starting the encoding for memory and making judgments and categorizing. And then that moves into working memory, which you have maybe 15 words that could go there, but also it's working on encoding for storage and where it needs to go in the brain and so on. And I think that's the end of it. Let's see the last, yeah, that's just me. I give a course at the Plain Language Academy for 4 weeks on the lessons we can learn from brain research that support plain language. Okay, I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I hope everybody has really interesting questions for this topic, because I think it's especially relevant for academics.
Yeah, my point is that you don't have to become a brain science, but if you can understand how complicated the reading process is and the challenges that people face, you can feel more empathetic to putting a little more time into your writing effort.
So Lydianne, apologies if I mispronounced it, said, I would think that with such a large part of the Canadian population holding post-secondary degrees, that the average of their reading competencies would be placed a bit higher. So this is a very eye-opening presentation.
Yeah, no, it's not higher. And as far as people having the most advanced skills at level 5, it's 4% of the population in any given country. So if you write to a university level, you're only reaching, 20% of the population.
So Annalise was wondering, where do we find your resources on writing that you mentioned?
In the Whova, there's documents connected with this conference and the presentation, and it's there. And if you don't find it there, then just email me. It's email@cherylstephens.com.
Yeah, so on the main page of the agenda for today's talk, there should be a link at the bottom with the handout that Cheryl's mentioning. Elise was also wondering, can you give an example of what backtracking is and why we shouldn't do that as writers?
Well, the reader's doing the backtracking. You're using the word head, and head has like 37 different meanings. So a person is jumping to a conclusion because that's how we operate. They're jumping to a conclusion. You're talking about a human head and trying to make sense of your sentence, and it doesn't make sense. So they back up and they reconsider. Maybe you mean the head as in the top of the project, or something else. So they're backtracking, trying to find the right use of that word in your moment.
Lydianne was asking, what advice would you give to academics who haven't yet realized how important it is to write in plain language? I second this question.
What advice would I give them? Well, when I worked with lawyers, I said, it's attitude. If you have the attitude you want the person to understand, you'll take a moment to think, would my grandmother understand this? Would my mother, would my niece, would my favorite nephew, would they understand it? And you just make more effort. I think attitude is the key thing, and probably scheduling the time, because it's not easy to make things plainer. It takes a bit of thought and outside of the box that you're in your academic field.
And I think that's a very important point, especially I know in the history discipline, it's a really hard wall to break that attitude about making your work accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Please make sure to type your questions into the chat.
One of the factors I didn't get into was organization and format. That has a tremendous contribution to making things easier. That's the hierarchy and the precedence, of ideas. And the more you can do to format it so that it's obvious, it's a structure, a skeleton for the ideas, that will help.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's a really good point. I know a couple of people have been adding into the chat links to other writing resources for graduate students. So thank you, Kat.
I think one of the most useful pieces of writing software is the Hemingway app, which you can get free. You can download it and you can run your documents through it. And it's very nicely marks them up in multicolored effect so that it identifies the problem that it's calling your attention to.
So Kim said, many folks I talk to use readability checkers. I generally advise against this in favor of reader testing, but I would love to hear your thoughts on possible alternatives.
Well, like I said, at the writing stage, I like Hemingway. The readability things are mathematical algorithms, and they can be complete message salad. You know, it just tells you like a filter. This is not going to go through the filter. You've got to reduce it. And they're generally rejected by anybody who does plain language work as being very helpful. So the readability measures, the arithmetical ones, they're trying to identify grade levels. I got interested in this research about the brain because this applies to anybody. You know, an advanced a senior academic person doesn't have time for reading muddy material, so they will like it, and their brains will work less hard if it's clear and simple.
Melissa added in another link to potential plain language writing advice. So I would advise anyone who has these amazing links and advice they'd like to add and share. I'm going to create a community chat when the call is done, and it would be great if everybody could add those links there as well so everybody can see them and ask additional questions for the presenters. So at this time, I would ask, is there any final questions, comments for Cheryl at this time? While they're typing, Jill, would you like me to put the link to your slideshow in that community post? Annalise was wondering, will the links be compiled and put into a resource? The links that I was just mentioning, I think it'll just be in the community chat with the Whova for the conference.
Hi, Chelsea. Yes, that's fine. That'd be great if you would.
Awesome, thank you. So I will make sure to put Jill, the University of Alberta group slideshow link into that community as well.
What am I doing? Never mind.
All right. And Cheryl added a link to the chat, see plainlanguage.gov as well. So thank you everyone for this great chat. I think it was really informative. It was great to hear these different strategies of communicating. And I think it's always great to hear about the importance of plain language in our day-to-day work. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the chats moving on today.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.